Lilah Lawson clutched the simple cotton bundle of her belongings as she stumbled along the dusty trail, tears streaking clean lines down her dirt-smudged face. Behind her, the echo of her father's thundering voice still rang in her ears. "No daughter of mine. Get out and never darken my doorstep again." The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the Montana territory as she walked away from the only home she'd ever known, her reputation in tatters over a lie she hadn't the power to disprove. She had walked for hours, her boots worn and feet blistered when the sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Lilah stiffened, fearing her brothers had come to deliver more of her father's wrath. She quickened her pace, though she knew it was futile. The rider slowed his horse to match her desperate stride. "Miss Lawson." The voice was deep, unfamiliar. She didn't look up, didn't stop walking. "Leave me be, I've been shamed enough." "Reckon that's not how I see it." The man guided his horse around to face her, forcing her to stop. "Name's Colton Zane. Own the ranch neighboring your father's." Lilah finally looked up, meeting the steel blue eyes of the tall cowboy atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. His face was tanned from years under the sun, a thin scar running along his jaw and beneath his wide-brimmed hat. She could see dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his expression that wasn't pity or judgment, the only two looks she'd seen since yesterday. "Mr. Zane, I appreciate your concern, but I am quite beyond help now." Her voice cracked on the last word. Colton dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. "Your father's a fool, Miss Lawson, and those who believed Harlan Pierce's stories are bigger fools still." Her breath caught. "You know. I know Pierce has been spinning tales about half the women in Silver Creek when they refuse his advances. Only difference is, your father chose to believe him instead of his own daughter." A fresh wave of tears threatened. Pierce had cornered her behind the general store, and when she'd fought him off, he'd torn her dress and spread rumors that she'd offered herself to him willingly, then turned wild when he rejected her. Her strict, God-fearing father had chosen the word of the banker's son over hers. "It doesn't matter now," she whispered. "I'm ruined in their eyes." Colton took a step closer, his imposing figure blocking the sun. "Where you planning to go? My aunt in Helena, perhaps, though I'm not certain she'll have me either once word reaches her." He nodded once, decisive. "That's 100 miles, Miss Lawson, not a journey for a woman alone." He extended his hand toward her, palm up. "Come with me." She stared at his hand, then at his face, searching for deceit or improper intent. "I'm offering you safe passage and honest work, not charity," he added, reading her hesitation. "My ranch needs help, and you need somewhere to start over." "Why would you help me? You barely know me." His jaw tightened. "I know enough. I know what it's like to be judged unfairly." He paused, then added more softly, "Now you're mine to look after, if you'll allow it." Something in those words, not possessive but protective, made her reach for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused, as he helped her mount his horse. As they rode away from Silver Creek, Lilah felt a strange mixture of terror and hope flutter in her chest. Whatever lay ahead, at least she wasn't facing it alone. The journey to Colton's ranch took most of the day. They rode in comfortable silence for the most part, with Lilah seated in front of Colton, his arms around her to hold the reins. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid presence of the cowboy behind her lulled Lilah into a sense of security she hadn't felt since before her mother passed 3 years ago. "It's just over this ridge," Colton said as they crested a hill in the late afternoon. Below them sprawled the Broken Spur Ranch, a collection of sturdy buildings nestled in a valley with rolling pastures stretched out around them. A herd of cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and several horses roamed in a corral near the main house. "It's beautiful," Lilah said truthfully. The ranch was smaller than her father's, but well kept and thriving by the looks of it. Been building it up for 7 years now, started with nothing but the land and 10 head of cattle. There was unmistakable pride in his voice. As they approached the main house, a woman emerged onto the porch. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Madeline," Colton called out as they neared, "we have a guest." The woman's keen eyes assessed Lilah as Colton helped her down from the horse. "So I see." Her voice was neither warm nor cold, merely observant. "This is Miss Lilah Lawson. She'll be staying with us. Miss Lawson, this is Madeline Cooper, my housekeeper and the closest thing to family I have out here." Madeline's expression softened slightly. "Lawson, James Lawson's daughter." Lilah nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of her situation again. "Yes, madam. Well, come inside then. You look like you could use a hot meal and a rest." Madeline turned and went back into the house without waiting for a response. Colton took Lilah's bundle. "Don't mind Madeline. She's protective of the ranch and those in it. She'll warm to you." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable. Simple but well-crafted furniture filled the rooms, with touches of homeliness in the form of quilts draped over chairs and pressed wildflowers framed on the walls. "I'll show you to your room," Madeline said, leading Lilah up a narrow staircase. "It's not much, but it's clean." The bedroom was small but pleasant, with a single bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small chest of drawers. A window overlooked the corral and the mountains beyond. "Thank you," Lilah said, feeling overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't know how I'll repay. Colton said you're here to work," Madeline interrupted, "and we could use the help. I'm not as young as I used to be, and there's too much for one woman to handle with all the men that need feeding and washing after." She paused, studying Lilah. "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam, and so, I managed my father's household after my mother died." Madeline nodded approvingly. "Good. Rest now. We'll talk more at supper." Left alone, Lilah sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process the rapid change in her circumstances. Just this morning, she had been the disgraced daughter of James Lawson, cast out with nothing but the clothes on her back. Now she was sitting in a stranger's home, offered work and shelter when she had nowhere else to turn. She couldn't help but wonder what Colton Zane wanted in return. Men, in her experience, rarely did anything without expecting something back. Yet something in those blue eyes told her he was different. She just didn't know how yet. After washing up and changing into her only other dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days, Lilah made her way downstairs. The smell of cooking food led her to the kitchen, where Madeline was stirring a large pot of stew. "Ah, there you are. Make yourself useful and set the table, would you? Plates are in that cupboard, cutlery in the drawer below." Grateful for the task, Lilah set about arranging the dining table for what appeared to be several people. "How many will be dining with us?" "Colton, you, me, and 3 ranch hands. The others take their meals in the bunkhouse, but Colton likes to keep his foreman and senior hands close for evening discussions." The front door opened, and Colton entered with 2 men in tow. He had removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that he pushed back from his forehead in a habitual gesture. His eyes found Lilah immediately, and a brief smile crossed his face. "Miss Lawson, I hope you've had a chance to rest." "Yes, thank you, Mr. Zane," he gestured to the men beside him. "These are 2 of my hands, Frank Wilson, my foreman, and Daniel Reed, who manages our horses." Both men nodded politely, curiosity evident in their expressions, but neither asking the obvious questions about her presence. Another man entered shortly after, introduced as Thomas Gray, who oversaw the cattle. All 3 ranch hands were respectful in their greetings, though Lilah could sense their unspoken questions. Small communities like these thrived on gossip, and a strange woman appearing suddenly at the Broken Spur would certainly raise eyebrows. Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. The men discussed ranch business preparations for winter, cattle that needed to be moved to different pastures, repairs that couldn't wait much longer. Lilah ate quietly, listening and observing the easy camaraderie between Colton and his men. "Miss Lawson will be helping Madeline with the household duties," Colton announced during a lull in conversation. "I expect you all to treat her with the same respect you show Madeline." There were nods all around, and Frank Wilson, a grizzled man with kind eyes, smiled at Lilah. "About time we had another woman around here. Madeline's cooking is the best in the territory, but even she can't keep up with all of us hungry cowboys." "I'll do my best to help," Lilah replied softly. After dinner, the men retired to the porch to smoke, while Lilah helped Madeline clear the table and wash the dishes. The older woman worked efficiently, directing Lilah with minimal words but no harshness. "How long have you worked for Mr. Zane?" Lilah ventured to ask. "Since he bought this place, my husband was his first foreman." Madeline handed Lilah a plate to dry. "Thomas died 3 years ago. Colton insisted I stay on, said the place wouldn't run without me." A rare smile crossed her face. "He's a good man. Stubborn as a mule and works himself harder than any of his hands, but a good man. He was very kind to offer me a position." Madeline gave her a sharp look. "Colton doesn't do things out of mere kindness, girl. He does what's right and he sees value where others might not. Remember that." Later, as Lilah prepared for bed, she heard a soft knock at her door. Opening it cautiously, she found Colton standing in the hallway, keeping a respectful distance. "I wanted to make sure you have everything you need," he said. "Yes, thank you. Everyone has been very kind." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The men won't ask questions. I've made it clear your past is your business alone." Relief washed over her. "I appreciate that, but Miss Lawson," he hesitated. "Silver Creek is only a day's ride away. Sooner or later, someone will recognize you or word will spread. I can protect you here, but I can't control what people say." "I understand." She straightened her shoulders. "I've done nothing wrong, Mr. Zane. I have nothing to be ashamed of, despite what my father and others may believe." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "No, you don't." He took a step back. "Good night, Miss Lawson." "Good night, Mr. Zane." As she closed the door, Lilah leaned against it, wondering at the strange turn her life had taken. For the first time since her disgrace, she felt a tentative hope for the future. Whatever Colton Zane's reasons for helping her, she was grateful for this chance to rebuild her life, even if it meant starting from nothing. The days at Broken Spur quickly fell into a rhythm for Lilah. She rose before dawn with Madeline to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent mornings cleaning and mending, afternoons baking or preserving food, and evenings helping with dinner. The work was hard but satisfying, and no one treated her with anything but respect. A week after her arrival, Lilah was hanging laundry in the yard when she noticed Colton by the corral, working with a spirited young mare. She paused to watch him, admiring the patience and gentle firmness with which he handled the nervous animal. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, confident yet never threatening. "He has a way with horses," Daniel Reed said, appearing beside her. "Never seen anyone who can calm a wild one like Colton. He seems to understand them," Lilah observed. Daniel nodded. "Says horses are honest creatures. They don't lie or pretend to be something they're not." He gave Lilah a meaningful glance. "Reckon that's why he prefers their company to most people's." In the corral, Colton had managed to slip a bridle on the mare and was now speaking softly to her as he stroked her neck. The horse's ears flicked back and forth, but she stood still, no longer trying to pull away. "That mare came to us half-starved and mean as a rattlesnake," Daniel continued. "Previous owner beat her something fierce. Most would have put her down as too dangerous, but Colton wouldn't hear of it, said she just needed someone to show her not all humans are cruel." Lilah felt a lump form in her throat. "Some people are worth saving, I suppose." Daniel gave her a knowing look. "Colton seems to think so." That evening, Lilah found herself alone with Colton on the porch after dinner. The ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, and Madeline was finishing up in the kitchen. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the valley, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and pink. "I saw you working with that mare today," Lilah said, breaking the comfortable silence. Colton leaned against the porch railing. "Bella, she's coming along. Still skittish, but she's learning to trust again. Daniel told me her story," he glanced at her. "Some scars take longer to heal than others, especially those you can't see." She nodded, understanding the parallel he was drawing. "Mr. Zane, may I ask why you helped me that day?" "The truth, please." Colton was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the distant horizon. "I knew your mother," he finally said. "Before she married your father, Eleanor was kind to me when others weren't." Surprised, Lilah turned to face him fully. "You knew my mother." "I was 16, working as a stable hand at the Lawson Ranch. Your mother had just arrived from back east to marry your father. She treated me like a person, not just some ranch boy. When I made mistakes, she defended me to your father." His expression grew distant with memory. "After they married, I moved on, built my own life, but I never forgot her kindness." "She never mentioned you," Lilah said softly. A sad smile touched his lips. "No reason she should have. I was just a boy she was kind to once." He straightened. "When I heard what happened to you, I couldn't stand by. Eleanor would have wanted someone to help her daughter." The revelation settled over Lilah like a warm blanket. Her mother had been gone for 3 years now, but somehow her kindness was still protecting Lilah. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "And thank you for honoring her memory by helping me." He nodded once. "You're doing well here. Madeline says you're a hard worker. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "It's not charity, Miss Lawson. You earn your keep." She smiled at that. "I know. And please call me Lilah. Miss Lawson reminds me too much of a life I no longer have." He considered this, then nodded. "Lilah then, and I'm Colton to everyone here." That night, as Lilah lay in bed, she thought about Colton Zane and the connection he'd shared with her mother. It explained his willingness to help her, but something told her there was more to it than a debt of gratitude to a woman long dead. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wouldn't notice, it wasn't pity or obligation she saw in those blue eyes. Whatever it was, it made her heart beat a little faster when he was near. As autumn progressed, Lilah's presence at Broken Spur became an accepted fact. She worked alongside Madeline, learning the rhythms of ranch life and contributing her own skills to the household. She discovered a talent for baking that earned her the devoted appreciation of the ranch hands, especially when she surprised them with apple pies made from the small orchard behind the house. One crisp October morning, Colton found her in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. "I'm riding into town for supplies," he said, adjusting his hat. "Thought you might want to come along, get some things for yourself." Lilah hesitated, flour dusting her hands. "I don't have any money. You've been working here for nearly a month without pay. It's time to settle accounts." He placed a small pouch on the table. "This is yours, fair and square." She stared at the pouch, then at him. "I didn't expect everyone who works at Broken Spur gets paid," he said firmly. "I told you it's not charity." An hour later, they were riding toward the small town of Pine Ridge, about 15 miles from the ranch. Colton had provided Lilah with a gentle mare named Daisy, and though Lilah hadn't ridden much before, she found herself enjoying the freedom of movement after weeks confined to the ranch. "You sit a horse well," Colton observed as they rode side by side. "Thank you. I've had a good teacher." Daniel had been giving her riding lessons when time allowed at Colton's request. The town of Pine Ridge was smaller than Silver Creek but busy enough, with a general store, a saloon, a small church, and various other businesses lining its main street. As they hitched their horses outside the general store, Lilah felt nervous eyes on her. A newcomer was always subject to curiosity in these small communities. Inside the store, Colton greeted the proprietor warmly. "Morning, Harold. Got quite a list today." Harold Simmons, a balding man with spectacles, beamed at Colton. "Mr. Zane, always good to see you." His curious gaze shifted to Lilah. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "This is Miss Lilah Lawson, my new housekeeper," Colton said smoothly. "She's helping Madeline with the running of Broken Spur." Harold's eyebrows rose slightly at the name Lawson, but to his credit, he simply nodded politely. "A pleasure, Miss Lawson. Any friend of Colton's is welcome here." While Colton discussed his supply order with Harold, Lilah browsed the store's offerings. She selected some personal items: soap, a hairbrush, a few yards of fabric to make herself a new dress. She was examining some ribbons when she heard a woman's voice behind her. "You must be the girl staying at Broken Spur." Lilah turned to find an elegantly dressed woman watching her with undisguised interest. Her blonde hair was arranged in a fashionable style, and her dress, though appropriate for a small western town, was clearly expensive. "Yes, I am," Lilah replied cautiously. The woman extended a gloved hand. "Victoria Caldwell, my father owns the bank here." Her assessment of Lilah was swift and, Lilah sensed, not entirely approving. How interesting that Colton has hired a new housekeeper. He's usually so particular about who he allows at the ranch. There was something proprietary in the way Victoria said Colton's name that made Lilah instantly wary. Mr. Zane has been very kind. Oh yes, Colton can be kind when it suits him. Victoria smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. We've known each other for years. I'm practically family to him. Before Lilah could respond, Colton appeared at her side. Victoria, he greeted, his tone cordial but noticeably cooler than when he spoke to Harold. I didn't expect to see you in town today. Father had business at the bank. I thought I'd do some shopping. Victoria's entire demeanor changed with Colton's arrival, becoming warmer, more animated. It's been too long since you've joined us for dinner, Colton. Father was just saying so last night. Been busy with the ranch, Colton replied. Winter preparations. Surely you can spare one evening. Victoria placed a hand on his arm. This Friday, perhaps. Father has some business matters to discuss with you as well. Colton hesitated, then nodded. Friday, then. Victoria beamed triumphantly. Wonderful. Oh, and your housekeeper is welcome too, of course. The afterthought was delivered with such transparent insincerity that Lilah had to suppress a smile. Thank you, but I'm needed at the ranch, Lilah said quickly. After Victoria departed with a lingering smile for Colton, Lilah raised an eyebrow at him. Family friend, Colton sighed. George Caldwell has been trying to marry me off to his daughter for years. He owns the bank that holds the loan on part of my land. I see. Lilah couldn't help the hint of amusement in her voice. She seems very determined. Like a mountain lion with a scent, Colton muttered, then looked embarrassed. Forgive me, that was ungentlemanly. Lilah laughed, a genuine sound that drew a smile from Colton. I think it was quite accurate, actually. They finished their shopping and loaded the supplies into the wagon Colton had brought for that purpose. As they prepared to leave town, Colton suddenly stiffened, his gaze fixed on something across the street. Lilah followed his line of sight and felt her blood run cold. Harlan Pierce, the man whose lies had destroyed her reputation in Silver Creek, was stepping out of the saloon. Colton's hand moved to her arm, steadying her. We can wait until he's gone, he said quietly. Lilah shook her head, a strange calm settling over her. No, I've done nothing wrong. I won't hide. Pierce hadn't noticed them yet, laughing with a companion as they stood outside the saloon. Lilah climbed into the wagon with Colton's help, holding her head high. As Colton took his seat beside her and picked up the reins, Pierce finally looked their way. Recognition dawned on his face, followed by a smirk that made Lilah's skin crawl. He said something to his companion, who looked over with newfound interest. Ignore him, Colton advised as he guided the wagon past them. Well, Pierce called out, if it isn't the Lawson girl. Found yourself a new protector, I see. Colton's knuckles whitened on the reins, but he kept his eyes forward. Nothing to say, Zane, Pierce continued. Or did she tell you the same stories she told everyone in Silver Creek? Girls got quite an imagination. Lilah felt Colton tense beside her, saw the muscle working in his jaw. Colton, she said softly, he's not worth it. For a moment, she thought he would stop the wagon and confront Pierce. Instead, he glanced at her, saw her pleading expression, and nodded once. They continued past without acknowledging Pierce further, though Lilah could feel the man's eyes on her back long after they'd left the town behind. I'm sorry, Colton said once they were well away from town. I should have anticipated he might be there. You couldn't have known. Lilah stared at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. At least now I know he's in the area. I can be prepared next time. Colton was quiet for a long moment. What exactly happened, Lilah, if you don't mind my asking? She sighed, the familiar pain of the memory washing over her. Pierce had been pursuing me for months. I wasn't interested. There was something about him I didn't trust. One evening after church, he cornered me behind the general store, tried to force himself on me. She swallowed hard. I fought back, scratched his face. He tore my dress in the struggle. Colton's expression darkened. And then he ran to my father with a different story, said I'd been throwing myself at him for weeks, that I'd become hysterical when he rejected me, torn my own dress and scratched him when he tried to calm me down. Her voice turned bitter. My father believed him without question, the banker's son over his own daughter. Your father is a fool, Colton said, echoing his words from the day they met. Perhaps, or perhaps he simply saw what he expected to see. Lilah looked out at the passing landscape. After my mother died, he became harder, more rigid in his beliefs. He was always strict, but without her influence. She trailed off. I think he was looking for a reason to be disappointed in me. That doesn't excuse what he did. No, Lilah agreed. It doesn't. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. As the ranch came into view, Colton spoke again. Pierce is known in these parts. He has a reputation among those who pay attention. His voice was measured, careful. You weren't his first victim, Lilah. Just the first whose father took his side. The confirmation both pained and relieved her. Does knowing that make it better or worse, I wonder? Colton's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of comfort that ended too soon. It makes it clearer where the truth lies. And truth has a way of coming to light, sooner or later. As they approached the ranch, Lilah realized that despite the unpleasant encounter with Pierce, she felt stronger than she had in weeks. The shame that had weighed on her since that terrible day was beginning to lift. Here at Broken Spur, she was judged by her actions, her work, her character, not by the lies of a spiteful man. And in Colton Zane's steady presence, she had found something unexpected. Not just protection or employment, but someone who believed in her when no one else would. The encounter with Harlan Pierce cast a shadow over the following days, though Lilah tried not to let it affect her work. She threw herself into her duties with renewed vigor, as if proving her worth to the ranch could somehow erase the stain on her reputation. If Madeline noticed her increased efforts, she made no comment, though her normally stern expression softened somewhat when directing Lilah in her tasks. Friday arrived, and with it, Colton's dinner engagement at the Caldwells. He appeared in the kitchen doorway as Lilah and Madeline were preparing supper, dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman. You clean up well, Madeline observed, adjusting his collar with maternal familiarity. Colton looked uncomfortable. Feels like putting on someone else's skin. His eyes met Lilah's across the room, and something in his expression made her heart skip. You look very handsome, she said before she could stop herself. A faint color touched his cheeks. Thank you. He cleared his throat. I won't be late. George Caldwell tends to retire early. And Victoria? Lilah couldn't help asking, immediately regretting the implication in her tone. A hint of a smile touched Colton's lips. Miss Caldwell's wishes are of little concern to me. After he'd gone, Madeline gave Lilah a knowing look. Victoria Caldwell has been setting her cap for Colton for 3 years now. Girl's determined, I'll give her that. They would make a suitable match, Lilah said carefully, focusing on the vegetables she was chopping. Her father owns the bank, and Colton needs his goodwill for his loan. Madeline snorted. Suitable, maybe, but Colton's never been one to do what's merely suitable. She wiped her hands on her apron. That man needs a woman who sees him for who he is, not what he has or what he could become with the right connections. Later that night, Lilah sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. The moon was full, casting silver light over the ranch buildings and pastures beyond. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely howl echoing through the valley. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Colton rode into the yard, his figure a dark silhouette against the moonlit landscape. He dismounted smoothly, led his horse to the stable, and emerged a few minutes later. When he spotted Lilah on the porch, he paused, then came to join her. You're up late, he said, settling into the chair beside hers. Couldn't sleep. She studied his profile in the moonlight. How was dinner with the Caldwells? Exactly as expected. George talked business and hinted at my need for his continued support. Victoria talked about everything and nothing, ensuring I knew how well she would manage a ranch household. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. It was exhausting. Lilah smiled despite herself. Poor Mr. Zane, pursued by a beautiful heiress, he gave her a sidelong glance. Beauty isn't everything, Lilah. The way he said her name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. No, she agreed softly. It isn't. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the occasional nickering of horses, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of the wind through the trees. George wants an answer soon, Colton finally said. About Victoria. Lilah's heart seemed to stop. An answer! He's offered to forgive the remaining loan on my land if I marry his daughter. His voice was matter of fact, but Lilah could hear the underlying tension. It would secure Broken Spur's future, no more debt. I see. Lilah struggled to keep her voice steady. And what will you tell him? Colton turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. What would you tell him if you were me? The question caught her off guard. It's not my place to say. I'm asking anyway. Lilah took a deep breath. I would say that a ranch built on a loveless marriage isn't worth having. That debt can be repaid in time, but years spent with someone you don't love, that's a debt that only grows. Colton was silent for so long that Lilah feared she'd overstepped. Then quietly he said, That's what I thought you'd say. Before she could respond, he stood. It's late, you should get some rest. Colton, she said, rising as well, whatever you decide, I hope it brings you happiness. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Lilah felt exposed, as if he could see straight through to her heart with all its confused emotions. Thank you, Lilah. Good night. As she watched him walk into the house, Lilah acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Colton Zane. And now he was considering a marriage proposal that would take him away from her forever. The realization kept her awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling as she contemplated a future at Broken Spur without Colton's quiet strength at its center. November brought the first snow to the valley, transforming Broken Spur into a winter wonderland overnight. Lilah woke to find the world outside her window draped in white, the morning sun casting a rosy glow over the pristine landscape. The cold weather brought changes to the ranch routine. The cattle were moved to sheltered pastures, the horses spent more time in the stables, and everyone worked to ensure adequate food stores for the long winter ahead. Lilah found herself busier than ever, helping Madeline preserve the last of the harvest and prepare for the coming months. Colton had been quieter since the night of the Caldwell dinner, often lost in thought. He'd made no mention of George Caldwell's proposal again, and Lilah hadn't dared to ask. The uncertainty hung between them, an unspoken tension that neither seemed willing to address. One morning, as Lilah was gathering eggs from the henhouse, Frank Wilson approached her, his expression troubled. Miss Lilah, there's riders coming. Thought you should know. She straightened, clutching her basket of eggs. Riders? Who? Can't be sure yet, but he hesitated. One of them looks like James Lawson. The basket slipped from Lilah's grasp, eggs shattering on the ground. My father, Frank nodded grimly. Colton's riding out to meet them. Thought you might want to make yourself scarce for a bit. Lilah's first instinct was indeed to hide, to avoid the confrontation that had haunted her nightmares. But something in her rebelled at the thought of cowering from the man who had cast her out without a fair hearing. No, she said, straightening her shoulders. I won't hide. This is my home now. Frank looked surprised, then gave her a respectful nod. As you wish. I'll let Colton know you're aware. By the time Lilah had cleaned up the broken eggs and made her way to the main house, 3 riders were approaching the ranch yard. Colton stood on the porch, his stance casual but alert. Madeline appeared at Lilah's side, a comforting presence. You don't have to face him, the older woman said quietly. Yes, I do. Lilah's hands trembled, but her resolve was firm. I've done nothing wrong. As the riders drew closer, Lilah could make out her father's stern face, along with her oldest brother, Matthew, and to her surprise, Reverend Thomas from the Silver Creek Church. They dismounted, and James Lawson's gaze immediately found his daughter standing on the porch beside Madeline. So it's true, he said, his voice carrying across the yard. You've been hiding here all this time. Colton stepped forward. Miss Lawson has been employed here, Mr. Lawson. There's been no hiding. James Lawson's attention shifted to Colton, his expression hardening. This is family business, Zane. Step aside. Anything concerning Miss Lawson's welfare concerns me, Colton replied evenly. She's under my protection now. Lilah moved to stand beside Colton, drawing strength from his solid presence. What do you want, father? James Lawson looked older than Lilah remembered, the lines in his face deeper, his eyes more tired. We've come to bring you home, Lilah. The words she had once longed to hear now rang hollow. Home, you cast me out, said I was no daughter of yours. Things have changed, her brother Matthew interjected. Harlan Pierce has been exposed as a liar, Lilah's breath caught. What? Reverend Thomas stepped forward. Miss Lawson, I owe you an apology on behalf of the church and the community. It seems Mr. Pierce has been less than truthful about his encounters with several young women. Another family came forward with similar accusations, and upon investigation, we discovered a pattern of behavior. In other words, Colton said coldly, you finally believed the women he victimized instead of the man who assaulted them. The Reverend had the grace to look ashamed. Yes, and we are deeply sorry for the pain and injustice Miss Lawson has suffered. James Lawson cleared his throat. Your name has been cleared, Lilah. You can come home with your reputation intact. Lilah stood frozen, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. Vindication, yes, but also anger, hurt, and a strange sense of loss. The life she had built at Broken Spur over the past 2 months suddenly felt threatened, not by scandal but by its resolution. My reputation, she repeated slowly. That's what concerns you, Father, not that I was telling the truth all along. Not that you chose to believe a stranger over your own daughter, her father stiffened. I've admitted I was wrong. What more do you want? An apology might be a start, Colton suggested, his voice deceptively mild. James Lawson's face reddened. I've come to bring my daughter home. That should be apology enough. It isn't, Lilah said, surprising herself with her firmness. And I'm not coming home, Father. I have a life here now, work that matters, people who value me for who I am, not just for the family name I bear. This is absurd. James looked from Lilah to Colton, his expression darkening. What hold does this man have over you? What has he promised you? Nothing but honest work and respect, Lilah replied, which is more than I received from my own family. Matthew stepped forward, his expression pleading. Lilah, be reasonable. Your place is with your family. What will people say if you stay here, living under the same roof as an unmarried man? They'll say she's a respected employee of Broken Spur Ranch, Colton answered before Lilah could, and anyone who implies otherwise will answer to me. The tension in the yard was palpable. Ranch hands had begun to gather at a distance, watching the confrontation with concerned expressions. Frank Wilson had positioned himself not far from Colton, his stance making it clear where his loyalties lay. James Lawson seemed to realize he was on unfriendly ground. His expression shifted from anger to a calculated reasonableness. Lilah, I understand you're upset. Perhaps we can discuss this privately. Lilah shook her head. There's nothing to discuss, Father. I've made my decision. You're being foolish, James snapped, his patience evaporating. What future do you think you have here, as a housekeeper? Is that what your mother raised you to be? The mention of her mother stung. My mother raised me to be honest and to stand up for myself. I think she would be proud of the woman I've become, even if you aren't. Her father's face twisted with frustration. Very well, if you insist on this path, don't expect any further support from me or your brothers. You've made your choice. Yes, Lilah agreed quietly, I have. The 3 men mounted their horses, James Lawson refusing to look at his daughter again. As they prepared to ride away, Reverend Thomas paused. Miss Lawson, regardless of your decision today, please know that you would be welcomed back to our congregation should you ever return to Silver Creek. Your name has been fully cleared. Lilah nodded her acknowledgement, unable to find words of forgiveness just yet. As the riders disappeared down the trail, she felt her knees weaken, the full weight of the confrontation hitting her at once. Colton's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. You handled that with more grace than he deserved, he said quietly. She looked up at him, searching his face. Did I do the right thing? His blue eyes were warm with admiration. Only you can answer that, but for what it's worth, I think you showed remarkable courage. That evening, after the excitement had died down and the ranch had returned to its normal routine, Lilah sat by the fire in the main room, lost in thought. The day's events kept replaying in her mind the vindication of her truth. Her father's conditional offer of return, her own surprising resolve to stay at Broken Spur. Colton entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Lilah and sat in the chair opposite her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. Penny for your thoughts, he said after a moment. Lilah sipped her coffee, gathering her words. I keep thinking about what my father said about my future here. She looked up at Colton. Was I foolish to refuse his offer? Do you regret your decision? No, she said without hesitation, but I wonder if I've closed a door I shouldn't have. Colton was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Doors close, Lilah, others open. The question is which ones lead to a life you actually want to live. And what about you? She asked, unable to stop herself. Have you decided about George Caldwell's offer? His eyes returned to hers, intense in the firelight. I have. And I told him no. His voice was steady, certain. Some prices are too high, even for financial security. Relief washed over Lilah, followed immediately by guilt at her selfishness. But your ranch will prosper or fail on its own merits, not on a marriage of convenience. He set his coffee cup aside and leaned forward. When I marry Lilah, it will be for love, nothing less. The way he looked at her as he said it made her heart race. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, or perhaps hadn't allowed herself to see. A tenderness, a question, a possibility. Colton, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He stood abruptly. It's been a long day, you should rest. His tone was gentle but final, closing the moment before it could fully form. Good night, Lilah. As he left the room, Lilah remained by the fire, wondering if she had imagined the emotion in his eyes or if, like her, Colton Zane was fighting a battle between head and heart and wasn't yet ready to surrender. December arrived with fierce snowstorms that isolated Broken Spur from the outside world for days at a time. The ranch settled into its winter rhythm, with the men focusing on keeping the animals fed and sheltered while Lilah and Madeline maintained the household. The long evenings were spent gathered around the fire, sharing stories and songs, playing cards, or simply enjoying the warmth and companionship. Lilah found herself growing closer to everyone at the ranch during these quiet winter days. Frank Wilson taught her to play chess. Daniel Reed shared tales of his travels before coming to Broken Spur, and Thomas Gray revealed a surprising talent for whittling, creating delicate wooden animals that he shyly presented to Lilah and Madeline. Even Madeline had softened considerably toward Lilah, sharing family recipes and stories of her life with her late husband. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, the older woman unexpectedly broached a subject she had previously avoided. Colton was married once, you know, she said casually, as if commenting on the weather. Lilah nearly dropped the pot she was holding. Married? I had no idea, Madeline nodded, continuing to knead dough with practiced movements. Long before he came here, he was barely 20, she was 18. Rebecca was her name, pretty little thing from a good family. What happened? Lilah asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Childbirth took her and the baby both. Madeline's voice softened with old sorrow, nearly destroyed him. He worked himself half to death after that, taking any job, no matter how dangerous. That's how he got that scar on his jaw bar fight in some mining town where he was breaking horses. Lilah's heart ached for the young man Colton had been, facing such a devastating loss. How did he end up here? Won the initial parcel of land in a poker game, if you can believe it, said it was a sign to put down roots again. Madeline glanced at Lilah. He's built everything you see from nothing but his own hard work and determination. Why are you telling me this now? Madeline's shrewd eyes assessed her. Because I see the way you look at him, and the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. She returned to her dough. Colton deserves happiness, Lilah, but he's afraid to reach for it, afraid to lose someone again. The revelation stayed with Lilah for days afterward, casting Colton's reserved nature in a new light. She began to notice things she hadn't before, how he never spoke of his past before Broken Spur, how he kept people at a careful distance despite his natural kindness, how the rare occasions when he truly smiled transformed his entire face. As Christmas approached, the ranch was filled with preparations for the holiday. Madeline directed the decoration of the main house with pine boughs and ribbons, while Lilah baked traditional treats her mother had taught her to make. The men brought in a magnificent pine tree from the foothills, setting it up in the main room where everyone could enjoy it. On Christmas Eve, after a festive dinner with all the ranch hands, gifts were exchanged around the fire. Lilah had used some of her wages to purchase small presents for everyone: a new pipe for Frank, leather gloves for Daniel, a whittling knife for Thomas, and a beautiful shawl for Madeline. For Colton, she had secretly embroidered a handkerchief with his initials, a simple gift but one she had put her heart into. When Colton opened it, his expression softened in a way that made Lilah's breath catch. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you." He handed her a small package in return. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a chain. "Open it," he urged. Lilah carefully pried open the locket to find a tiny sprig of dried wildflowers inside. "From the meadow," Colton explained, "where we first met, so you'll always remember that day." As if she could ever forget. Later, when the others had retired and only Lilah and Colton remained by the dying fire, a comfortable silence settled between them. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in quiet peace. "My first Christmas away from home," Lilah mused, touching the locket that now hung around her neck. "Yet somehow it feels more like Christmas than any I can remember." Colton studied her in the firelight. "Do you miss them, your family?" "Parts of them," she admitted. "My brother's teasing. The traditions we shared," she sighed. "But not the constraints, not my father's disappointment or the feeling that I was never quite good enough." "You are more than good enough, Lilah," Colton said, his voice low and intense. "You are extraordinary." She looked up, startled by the vehemence in his tone. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Colton stood abruptly, moving to stare out the window at the falling snow. "Colton?" Lilah rose as well, approaching him cautiously. "What is it?" He didn't turn. "Madeline told you about Rebecca, didn't she?" "Yes," she admitted softly. "She thought I should know." He nodded, still facing the window. "It was a lifetime ago. Sometimes I can barely remember her face." His voice was rough with emotion. "Is that terrible? To forget someone you once loved enough to marry?" "No," Lilah said gently. "It's human. I swore after losing her that I'd never put myself in that position again, never care so much that losing someone could destroy me." He finally turned to face Lilah, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen. But intentions have a way of crumbling when faced with reality. Lilah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "What reality is that?" He took a step toward her, then another, until he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You, Lilah, you're the reality I wasn't prepared for." Before she could respond, he reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. "I've tried to keep my distance. To be just your employer, your protector. But every day it becomes harder to pretend that's all I want to be." "Colton," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you," he confessed, his voice barely audible, "and it terrifies me." Joy bloomed in Lilah's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "It terrifies me too," she admitted, "to feel so much so quickly, to want something I never thought I could have." "And what is it you want, Lilah?" His eyes searched hers, hopeful yet hesitant. "You," she said simply, "just you." The confession hung in the air between them for a heartbeat before Colton closed the distance, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepening as Lilah responded with all the emotion she had been holding back for weeks. His arms encircled her, drawing her close, and she clung to him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. When they finally parted, both breathless, Colton rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you standing on that dusty road." Lilah smiled, her heart full to bursting. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it." He kissed her again, more gently this time. "Merry Christmas, Lilah." Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping Broken Spur in a blanket of white. Inside, by the dying embers of the Christmas fire, two hearts that had known pain and loss found in each other the courage to love again. The new year brought with it a subtle but significant change to life at Broken Spur. Though Lilah and Colton had agreed to keep their growing relationship discreet, the close quarters of ranch life made complete privacy impossible. Madeline, of course, had known immediately, giving Lilah a knowing smile the morning after Christmas. The ranch hands weren't far behind, exchanging meaningful glances when Colton's hand lingered a moment too long on Lilah's, or when they found reasons to be alone together. By February, the worst of winter was beginning to ease, though snow still blanketed the valley. On a rare sunny day, Colton suggested a ride to show Lilah a special place on the property she hadn't yet seen. They set out after breakfast, bundled against the cold, their horses picking their way carefully through the snow-covered landscape. Where exactly are we going? Lilah asked as they rode side by side. There's a ridge overlooking the entire valley, Colton replied. Most beautiful view on the ranch, my favorite place to think. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily into the foothills that bordered the ranch's eastern edge. Finally, they crested a rise and Lilah gasped at the panorama that stretched before them. The entire valley lay spread out below, Broken Spur at its center, the buildings tiny from this height. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks gleaming white against the clear blue sky. It's breathtaking, Lilah said, dismounting with Colton's help. He tied their horses to a nearby pine and led her to a flat rock overlooking the valley. They sat together, Colton's arm around her shoulders, sharing a comfortable silence as they absorbed the view. I came up here the day after you arrived, Colton said after a while. Sat right here trying to figure out what to do about the strong-willed woman who had suddenly appeared in my life. Lilah leaned into him, smiling. And what conclusion did you reach? That you were trouble, he said with a chuckle. Beautiful, intriguing trouble that was going to complicate my carefully ordered existence. Was I really so disruptive? His expression grew serious. You have no idea. I'd built walls around my heart so high I thought no one could scale them. Then you arrived and it was as if they simply crumbled. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar along his jaw. I'm glad they did. He turned to kiss her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. Lilah, there's something I need to ask you, her heart quickened at his tone. Yes. Colton took both her hands in his expression earnest. These past months have been the happiest I can remember. You've brought light and warmth back into my life when I thought those things were gone forever. You've done the same for me, she whispered. I want to build a life with you, Lilah, a real life, not as employer and employee, but as husband and wife. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl. This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it as my wife. Tears filled Lilah's eyes, blurring her vision of the man before her. Are you certain? Your ranch, your reputation mean nothing without you, he finished firmly. I love you, Lilah Lawson. Will you marry me? Yes, she said without hesitation, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, Colton, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, Lilah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. We should head back, Colton said reluctantly after a while. Storm clouds are moving in. Indeed, the clear blue sky had given way to gray clouds gathering on the horizon. They mounted their horses and began the journey back to the ranch, both glowing with the joy of their newly formalized commitment. They were halfway down the trail when the first snowflakes began to fall. What had started as a gentle flurry quickly intensified, the wind picking up and driving the snow horizontally. We need to hurry, Colton called over the rising wind. This storm is coming in faster than I expected. They urged their horses to a faster pace, but the trail was becoming treacherous, visibility diminishing by the minute. Lilah could barely see Colton ahead of her, his figure blurring in the swirling white. Suddenly, her mare stumbled on a hidden patch of ice. Lilah felt herself thrown forward as the horse lost its footing, tumbling down the steep slope beside the trail. She heard Colton's shout, felt the terrifying sensation of falling, then nothing. When she came to, Lilah was lying in the snow, pain radiating from her left ankle and arm. She could hear Colton calling her name, his voice frantic, then the sound of boots sliding down the slope toward her. Lilah, God, Lilah, are you all right? His face appeared above her, white with fear. I think so, she managed, trying to sit up. A sharp pain in her ankle made her gasp. My ankle, I think it might be broken. Colton quickly assessed her injuries, his hands gentle but urgent. Your ankle's badly sprained, maybe broken. Your arm, too. We need to get you back to the ranch. The storm was now in full force, a blizzard that made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Lilah's mare had run off, spooked by the fall. Can you stand? Colton asked, supporting her carefully. Lilah tried, but her ankle gave way, sending a wave of pain up her leg. I don't think so. Colton's expression was grim as he looked at the steep slope they would need to climb to reach his horse, then at the worsening storm. "We'll never make it back to the ranch in this," he said, "but there's a line shack about half a mile from here. If I can get you there, we can wait out the storm." He lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest. The journey up the slope was arduous, Colton struggling for footing in the deep snow while trying not to jostle Lilah's injuries. By the time they reached his horse, they were both covered in snow, Lilah shivering uncontrollably. Colton managed to get her onto the horse, then mounted behind her, holding her securely against him. "Hold on," he murmured against her ear. "Just hold on." The ride to the line shack was a blur of pain and cold for Lilah. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of Colton's strong arms around her and his voice urging her to stay awake. Finally, through the curtain of snow, a small cabin appeared. Colton dismounted, helped Lilah down, and carried her inside. The shack was basic but solid, a single room with a small stove, a narrow bed, and minimal supplies for ranch hands caught in bad weather. Colton laid Lilah gently on the bed, then moved quickly to start a fire in the stove. As warmth slowly filled the cabin, he returned to tend to her injuries. "I need to check your ankle," he said, carefully removing her boot. The ankle was swollen and beginning to bruise. "Definitely sprained, but I don't think it's broken." He found a first aid kit in the shack's supplies and wrapped her ankle firmly. Her arm, thankfully, seemed only bruised, not broken. "The storm's getting worse," he said, moving to the window. Outside, the world had disappeared into a white void. "We won't be able to leave until it passes." "How long?" Lilah asked, teeth chattering despite the growing warmth from the stove. "Could be hours, could be days." He returned to her side, concern etched on his face. "You're freezing. We need to get you warm." He found extra blankets in a trunk, wrapping them around her, then added more wood to the stove. Despite his efforts, Lilah continued to shiver, the combination of shock, pain, and cold refusing to release its grip. "This isn't working fast enough," Colton muttered. After a moment's hesitation, he sat on the edge of the bed. "Lilah, I need to get you warm. The best way is body heat." Despite her discomfort, Lilah managed a small smile. "Are you proposing to compromise my virtue, Mr. Zane?" A relieved laugh escaped him. "If you're well enough to jest, perhaps you're not as bad off as I feared." He grew serious again. "But we do need to get you warm." "I trust you, Colton," she said simply. He nodded, removing his snow-dampened coat and boots, then carefully arranged himself beside her on the narrow bed, pulling the blankets over both of them. He drew her gently against his chest, mindful of her injuries, and Lilah gratefully absorbed his warmth. "Better?" he asked softly. "Much," she murmured, already feeling the violent shivering begin to subside. They lay together as the storm raged outside, the wind howling around the small cabin like a living thing seeking entry. Gradually, Lilah's body warmed, the pain in her ankle and arm receding to a dull throb. "They'll be worried about us at the ranch," she said after a while. "Frank knows where we were heading. He won't try to come after us in this, but he'll know to check the line shack once the storm breaks." Colton's voice was reassuring, steady. Lilah looked up at him, studying his face in the dim light from the stove. "You saved my life today." "You scared years off mine," he replied, his arms tightening around her, "when I saw you fall." "I'm sorry. Don't apologize. It wasn't your fault." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "But perhaps this is a sign we should marry sooner rather than later. I don't think my heart can take many more scares like this." Despite her discomfort, Lilah laughed. "Are you saying you want to marry me because I'm accident-prone?" His expression softened. "I want to marry you because every moment spent with you is better than any moment without you, because you're brave and kind and stronger than anyone I've ever known. Because I love you, Lilah Lawson, more than I thought it was possible to love another person." Tears filled her eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. "I love you too, Colton, so much it frightens me sometimes." "Then we'll be frightened together," he said, kissing her gently, "for the rest of our lives." They spent the night in the line shack, talking quietly, making plans for their future, and dozing in each other's arms. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, trapping them in their small shelter. By the second evening, the worst had passed. though the snow was still deep enough to make travel difficult. On the morning of the third day, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Frank Wilson and Daniel Reed had come searching for them as soon as the storm allowed, bringing a sled to transport Lilah back to the ranch. The reunion at Broken Spur was emotional, with Madeline fussing over Lilah like a mother hen, and the ranch hands expressing their relief with awkward pats on Colton's shoulder and offers to handle his chores while he tended to his fiancée. News of their engagement spread quickly, met with genuine happiness from everyone at the ranch. Even in Pine Ridge, when word reached the small community, the reaction was largely positive, though Victoria Caldwell was notably absent from those offering congratulations. As spring approached, bringing with it new life and the promise of warmer days, preparations for the wedding began in earnest. Lilah, her ankle and arm fully healed, threw herself into planning a simple but meaningful ceremony to be held at Broken Spur in May. On a mild April day, as Lilah was hanging laundry in the yard, a familiar figure rode up the path to the ranch. Her heart stuttered when she recognized Matthew, her oldest brother. He dismounted slowly, approaching her with an uncertain expression. "Hello, Lilah, Matthew." She kept her voice neutral, unsure of his purpose. "What brings you here?" He removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "I heard you're to be married. News travels fast. May I speak with you privately?" Lilah hesitated, then nodded toward a bench under a nearby tree. They sat side by side, an awkward silence stretching between them. "Father doesn't know I'm here," Matthew finally said. "He's still coming to terms with everything." "You mean with my refusal to return home in disgrace?" Lilah said dryly. Matthew winced. "He's a proud man, Lilah. Too proud for his own good sometimes." He turned to face her directly. "But I'm not here about him. I'm here because you're my sister and I miss you. We all do." The simple admission brought unexpected tears to Lilah's eyes. "I've missed you too. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For not standing up for you when Pierce made those accusations, for not believing you." His voice broke slightly. "I should have known better." Lilah reached for her brother's hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Matthew glanced toward the main house. "This Zane fellow, does he treat you well?" A smile touched Lilah's lips. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "Good," Matthew nodded, satisfied. "Because if he didn't, I'd have to have words with him, and he looks like he could break me in half." Lilah laughed, the tension between them easing. "Colton is a good man, Matthew. I wish Father could see that. Perhaps in time." He hesitated. "About the wedding, I was hoping, that is, if you would allow it, I'd like to attend. The others too, John and Samuel, we've talked about it and we all want to be there for you." Fresh tears welled in Lilah's eyes. "I would like that very much." When Colton returned from checking the herd later that day, Lilah told him about Matthew's visit. "My brothers want to come to the wedding," she concluded, watching his reaction carefully. Colton considered this, his expression thoughtful. "And how do you feel about that?" "I want them here," she admitted. "They're still my family, despite everything." He nodded, pulling her into his arms. "Then they're welcome, all of them, even my father, if he decided to come." Colton tensed slightly but nodded again. "Even your father, though I can't promise not to tell him exactly what I think of how he treated you." Lilah smiled, resting her head against his chest. "Fair enough." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Madeline and Lilah sewed a wedding dress from fine fabric ordered from Helena. The ranch hands built an arch for the ceremony, and Frank, who had been a judge's clerk in his younger days, was given the honor of officiating. The day before the wedding, Lilah received a surprising visitor. Victoria Caldwell arrived at Broken Spur in her father's carriage, looking as elegant and composed as ever. "Miss Caldwell," Lilah greeted her cautiously when they were left alone in the sitting room. "This is unexpected." "I imagine it is," Victoria agreed, removing her gloves with deliberate movements. "I wanted to speak with you before tomorrow's celebration." Lilah tensed, preparing for confrontation. "Yes," Victoria met her gaze directly. "I've come to apologize." Of all the things Lilah had expected, an apology was the last. "Apologize? For what?" "For my behavior when we met, for the things I've said about you in town." Victoria had the grace to look ashamed. "I was jealous. I had set my sights on Colton Zane for years, and then suddenly there you were." "I see." Lilah wasn't quite ready to forgive so easily. "And now," Victoria sighed, her perfect composure slipping slightly, "and now I see that he loves you in a way he never would have loved me. It's humbling to realize that." The honesty in her voice was unmistakable. Lilah felt her resentment soften. "Thank you for telling me this. I won't be attending tomorrow," Victoria continued. "I'm not that magnanimous, but I wanted you to know that I wish you both happiness." She rose to leave, then paused. "He's a good man, Miss Lawson, one of the best I've ever known." "I know," Lilah said simply. Victoria nodded once, her composure fully restored. "Take care of him, then." After Victoria's departure, Lilah found herself reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been cast out in shame, walking a dusty road with nowhere to go. Tomorrow, she would marry a man who loved her completely, surrounded by people who had become a second family to her. The day of the wedding dawned clear and warm, as if nature itself approved of the union. The ceremony was to be held in the afternoon, in the meadow where Colton had first found Lilah on that fateful day. As promised, Lilah's 3 brothers arrived early, greeting their sister with genuine warmth and regarding Colton with a mixture of respect and lingering protectiveness. There was no sign of James Lawson, though Lilah had half expected, half hoped he might appear at the last moment. Madeline helped Lilah dress in her wedding gown, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin with lace accents. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with wildflowers from the meadow. "You look beautiful," Madeline said, unexpected tears in her eyes. "Colton won't know what hit him." A knock at the door revealed Matthew, looking handsome in his Sunday best. "It's time," he said, his expression softening as he took in his sister's appearance. "Lilah, you're a vision." "Thank you," she said, suddenly nervous. "Matthew, would you walk me down the aisle?" In father's place, her brother's eyes widened with surprise and emotion. "I would be honored." The meadow had been transformed for the occasion. Ranch hands and their families, neighbors from surrounding properties, and even some townsfolk from Pine Ridge had gathered to witness the union. At the far end, beneath an arch covered in spring wildflowers, Colton waited, looking more handsome than Lilah had ever seen him in a new black suit. As Lilah and Matthew approached, the assembled guests rose. Lilah barely noticed them, her eyes fixed on Colton, whose face transformed with wonder and love as he saw her. Frank Wilson stood beside him, Bible in hand, beaming with pride. Halfway down the makeshift aisle, Lilah faltered. A tall figure had appeared at the back of the gathering, James Lawson, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Father," she whispered. Matthew squeezed her arm reassuringly. "He arrived just before we started, said he couldn't miss his only daughter's wedding, no matter how stubborn he is." Tears blurred Lilah's vision as she continued toward Colton, her heart so full it threatened to burst. When she reached him, he took her hands in his eyes conveying everything words could not. Frank cleared his throat and began the ceremony. "Friends and family, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Colton Zane and Lilah Lawson in holy matrimony." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Colton and Lilah exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love, respect, and partnership that brought tears to many eyes in the audience. When Frank pronounced them husband and wife, Colton kissed Lilah with such tenderness that she felt her heart might overflow with happiness. As they turned to face their guests, now officially Mr. and Mrs. Zane, Lilah spotted her father standing at the back, a lone tear tracking down his weathered cheek. She squeezed Colton's hand, a silent request, and he nodded understanding. Together, they made their way through the well-wishers to where James Lawson stood. "Father," Lilah said softly. James Lawson looked older, more vulnerable than she remembered. "You look like your mother," he said gruffly. "She would have been proud today." "Thank you for coming," Lilah said, emotion thickening her voice. James turned to Colton, extending his hand. "Take care of my daughter, Zane. She deserves nothing but the best." Colton shook his hand firmly. "On that, sir, we are in complete agreement." The celebration that followed was joyous and lasted well into the night. There was feasting, dancing, and laughter under the stars. Lilah danced with each of her brothers, with Frank and Daniel and Thomas, and even briefly and awkwardly with her father. But it was the dances with Colton that she would remember most vividly, the way he held her, as if she were the most precious thing in the world, the warmth in his eyes that promised a lifetime of love, the whispered words meant only for her ears. As the festivities wound down and guests began to depart, Colton led Lilah away from the crowd, back toward the spot where they had exchanged their vows. "Happy, Mrs. Zane?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "And you? I have everything I never dared to hope for," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A beautiful wife, a family reconciled, a future filled with promise." Lilah thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment, her disgrace, her exile, the chance meeting on a dusty road that had changed the course of both their lives. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked, looking up at him in the moonlight. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I said many things. You rode beside me and said, 'Now you're mine to look after,'" she reminded him. "I was so lost, so alone. Those words gave me hope when I had none." "And now," he asked softly. "Now I am yours," she whispered. "And you are mine, not to look after but to love, to build a life with, to face whatever comes together." Colton kissed her then, under the vast Montana sky, sealing their commitment with a promise that needed no words. As they walked hand in hand back to the ranch that was now truly their home, Lilah thought of all the twists of fate that had led her here, the pain and loss, the courage and hope, the love that had blossomed from the most unlikely beginning. Her family had cast her out in shame, but in doing so had set her on the path to finding where she truly belonged. Not as a dutiful daughter or a proper young lady, but as a woman who knew her own worth, who had fought for her happiness, and who had found in Colton Zane a love worth every hardship she had endured. 5 years later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across Broken Spur Ranch as Lilah Zane stood on the porch, watching her husband lead their 3-year-old son on a gentle pony. Little James, named for both his grandfathers, sat proudly in the saddle, his small hands gripping the pommel while Colton walked beside him, one hand ready to catch him should he wobble. "Mama, look," James called, waving excitedly. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see you, sweetheart," Lilah called back, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew. "You're doing wonderfully." The ranch had prospered in the 5 years since their marriage. Colton had expanded their herd, built a larger barn, and added a wing to the main house to accommodate their growing family. Frank Wilson had remained as foreman, though he now talked of retiring soon. Daniel Reed had married a schoolteacher from Pine Ridge and built a small house on a corner of Broken Spur land that Colton had gifted them as a wedding present. Madeline still ruled the kitchen, though she had gradually ceded more responsibilities to Lilah as the years passed. Now she focused primarily on spoiling young James and preparing for the arrival of the new baby. The relationship with Lilah's family had slowly healed. Her brothers visited regularly, bringing their own wives and children to play with James. Even James Lawson had softened, his gruff exterior melting completely in the face of his grandson's adoration. He visited every few months, staying in the guest room that Lilah always kept ready for him. Life was not without its challenges. There had been drought years that threatened the cattle, harsh winters that tested their resilience, and the usual trials of running a successful ranch. But through it all, Colton and Lilah had faced each obstacle together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. As Lilah watched her husband and son complete their circuit of the yard, she felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced that day in the meadow when Colton had found her at her lowest moment and offered her not charity, but dignity. A chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. Colton lifted James from the pony, swinging him high into the air before settling him on his shoulders. The boys' delighted laughter carried across the yard as they approached the house. "Did you see me, Mama?" James asked as they climbed the porch steps. "I rode all by myself, with a little help from Papa," Colton corrected with a wink at Lilah. "I saw," Lilah assured her son, reaching up to ruffle his dark hair so like his father's. "You'll be outgrowing that pony soon if you keep growing like a weed." Colton set James down, and the boy immediately ran inside, calling for Madeline to tell her about his adventure. Left alone on the porch, Colton drew Lilah into his arms, one hand gently caressing her rounded belly. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. "Wonderful," she replied truthfully. "Though your daughter is quite active today." A smile lit his face. "My daughter, is it? Yesterday you were certain it was another son." "A mother knows these things," Lilah said with mock solemnity, then laughed as Colton's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Truthfully, I don't care as long as the baby is healthy. Boy or girl, this child will be loved." "Just as its mother is loved," Colton murmured, kissing her tenderly. As the kiss deepened, Lilah reflected on how far they had come from that fateful day on the dusty road outside Silver Creek. She had been broken then, her reputation in tatters, her future uncertain. Colton had been guarded, his heart walled off from the pain of his past. Together they had healed each other, found strength in each other, built a life that neither could have imagined alone. The sound of James calling for them broke the moment. Colton sighed, resting his forehead against Lilah's. "Duty calls." "Always," she agreed with a smile. "But later, when the house is quiet." "When the house is quiet," he promised, his eyes warm with love and desire. "I'll remind you just how grateful I am that you became mine that day." "And I'll remind you," Lilah said, stroking his cheek where the old scar had faded to a thin white line, "that from the moment you rode beside me and offered me your hand, I was already yours in all the ways that truly mattered." Hand in hand, they went inside to their son, to the family they had created, to the life they had built from the ashes of their separate pains. Outside, the sun continued its descent toward the distant mountains, bathing Broken Spur Ranch in golden light, a fitting tribute to the love that had transformed two wounded souls into a family bound by something stronger than shame or regret, stronger even than the forces that had once threatened to destroy them. A love born on a dusty road, nurtured through hardship and joy, and destined to endure for all the days of their lives.